Okay, now I can actually talk. One thing that is very important is not only that this paper is in this program, but that it documents how the notion of culture is important in corporation. The fact that 91% of the CEO says that it is important, and half of them put in the top 3 most important things to improve the value of the company, I think is quite remarkable, because certainly does not represent the top 3 of the things we study or the top 3 of the things that we teach our students. In fact, I think there is a very interesting sort of wave in history of economic and finance thought, because not very many people know that the Modigliani-Bloomberg theory of life cycle starts by saying most people think that savings is driven by cultural issues. We're going to make a model that can explain much more than cultural issues. So there was an entire generation of economists that fought with pre-existing cultural explanation, and so saw culture as a terrible residual you should never mention. I think that in all my PhD courses, I never heard the word culture at MIT. And now things have changed, and in economics, culture has been brought and everywhere. In fact, what I want to say is that we're actually a little bit late to the game. This is an n-gram analysis of the use of word corporate culture in books. And as you see, peaked around sort of 2000 and is already down. So we financial economists arrive late to the game. One thing that is important is trying to understand what we say with culture. I think that in their paper, Lillian and company, they take a very sort of non-committal approach to try to get people to say what they think about culture, which is fine, but it is a bit problematic if we want to move forward in this area, because different people intend culture in a different way. And very often, culture is a synonym with propaganda rather than with culture. And so we need to be careful of what we mean. In particular, I think that my 2 favorite examples is one is the Goldman culture. They state in their website that the company is dedicated to comply fully with the letter and the spirit of the laws, not just the letter, the spirit of the law, rules and ethical principles that govern it, that its clients always come first, and that it's able to address potential conflict of interest. I think that this is Goldman being concerned of my statement. Now, the interesting thing is that as a result of the Aberystwyth case, a shareholder brought a suit and say, wait a minute, this is false advertising. You're saying that you do all these things. Now, we can discuss whether Abacus was illegal or not illegal, but certainly did not fit all those principles stated there. And you know what Goldman lawyers said? That the statement were not false, but that they were simply mere puffery, non-actionable statement of opinion that were completely irrelevant. So you have one side of Goldman stating in a website that this is why they live by those standards, and the lawyers say that those standards are basically bullshit, and that you can ignore them and continue. So what is the culture of Goldman? Is the one that they advertise at the beginning, or the one that their lawyers practice in the day-to-day operation? And which one do you think is sticks? And if you ask the CEO of Goldman, I suspect you get the first version, and I don't know which one is the real version. Another thing of culture as a propaganda, there are few companies in the world with a worse environmental record than Massey Energy, and this is the website, and they are also responsible to treat, did not take good care of the risk of their workers. There are a lot of accidents, etc. But if you look at their website, plenty of values, great things, and so on and so forth. So I think it's useful moving forward to differentiate with at least 4 different notions of culture. I think they're all present in their work, but they're a little mixed. And I think that they are different in terms of their originality that they bring to the academic and the financial discussion. The first one is sort of a cultural norm or expectation that what I would call are value neutral. If we all decide to have a culture to drive on the right or to culture on the left, or we have a culture of being on time at meetings, or being exactly 5 minutes late at meetings, or exactly 15 minutes late at meeting. I think that you go to Harvard and the classes start, I think, 5 minutes after the hour. Why? Because there is a pre-stated delay. You go to Italy, it's 15 minutes. You go to Chicago, it's 0 minutes. This is, as long as we all agree, I don't think there is much of an issue as long as you know what the issue is. Or, for example, the culture of showing up at seminars, even when they're boring, because that's what you're supposed to do. Or the tone of questions. I remember that once I gave a seminar at psychology at Northwestern, and people were actually nice. This is so foreign to me as an issue that it's a different social norm. Then sort of there are fundamental values that I will not even call norms, are fundamental value that might not even be value enhancing, but I think some of us feel strongly about it. The idea that you don't discriminate, or you don't make fun of an handicapped person, or you don't use delegated power to obtain financial interest or personal financial interest or sexual benefits. I think that this is not necessarily value enhancing. We hope it is, but I think that are values that we hope ourselves and our companies, our organization subscribe to. But I'm not so sure that this is exactly what we intend with corporate culture. Then there is sort of instrumental values. Voltaire was famous to say, I want my butler to be religious because it's less likely to steal from me. So it's the fact that you advertise values in order to achieve a goal. And I'm not so sure that I call them values. This goes more sort of propaganda, but I think it's an interesting line. And then finally, there is the value of like a mission. I don't know whether you ever listened to the speech that John Kennedy, I think, gave in Texas to launch the race to the moon. It's a very inspirational speech. And he said, we're not there because of fear, we're going there because we can. And reach the moon by the end of the decade. That's a mission. I'm not sure it's a value, but it's a way to focus mind in one direction. Or you put customers first, or you say, how would Sam do? Of course, this is for Walmart. You have this way of thinking, of directing employees, because we live in a world of very incomplete contracting. And so we want to complete this contracting, these incentives, etc., with some way to interpret reality. And whether this is through a goal set by the president, whether this is through a statement of the company, customers first, whether this is the old founder, I think those are the various things. Now, it's useful to talk which one we're about. I think that as economists, maybe, at least I find it less interesting, not necessarily less important, but less interesting for its original contribution, the culture as a mission. It is the one that is easier for us to understand, because as I said, it's a way to complement incentive scheme. I once was on a board of a company that put health and safety as a priority. And the first board meeting, actually, we got instructed how to evacuate the room in case of an accident. Every meeting that superiors had with subordinates, the issue of health and safety came first as a discussion, was first in the way people were compensated, and surprise, surprise, they did extremely well on that margin. And year after year, they improved. I'm not so sure that we need to use the word culture to describe this. This is just an objective function that is pursued with very traditional things, which are promotion and compensation. And of course, there are trade-offs. If I put that as number one, I cannot put anti-corruption at number one. At the very minimum would be number two. And in that case was number 115, but that's a different story. Okay? So, I think is interesting how to sort of deal with these issues in the standard economic model. I think the culture as a mission is relatively easy. The other one, I think, is more difficult. Now, because they have sort of a culture and the distortive effect of culture, I think that we should always map it into the academic culture. They say that 41% of people pass a positive MPV project and they go for high return. So I don't want to do a survey here, but I would like to know how many, he already raised his hand answering this question, that to say how many people give an easy midterm in order to increase their teaching rating, and Jonathan Burgos said, yes, I am the one. I think this is a very common thing that we do. So when we look at other culture, when we look at fraud in other places, I think it's always useful to benchmark in our academic environment, because we're not that great after all. Now, the thing that I find most interesting of their paper, I was a bit skeptical, because if you ask the Pope how the culture of the church is doing, they'll probably say great, okay? What is surprising is they don't, and Jillian would said very clearly depends a bit on the way they ask the question, but I think that by and large, they are not very satisfied with the way they bring culture in, which means that culture is actually difficult to deal, and is related to the way, number one, we don't know what it is, so we need to define what culture is. And the other point, which is the one they work on with the sort of the previous thing, which is how to create and maintain a certain culture. And so they find, not surprising, that tone at the top is very important. They find that continuing investments is important. And they also found that underinvestment is very common. Now, my view is that one characteristic of a culture is that it's shared by people in the organization. So what I invite them to do, they've done an enormous amount of effort in trying to define the issue. If they could do more to link it to what people think at the bottom of the organization. In my view, if you want to learn what the culture is, you don't ask the CEO, that's propaganda. You ask the last person in the organization, and they will tell you very precisely. I think that everybody at Chicago would say that people show up on time at seminars. Why? Because Jim Farmer shows up on time at seminar, and the only time he was 3 minutes late, because the day before he won the Nobel Prize, the seminar started without him. Okay, so those are sort of standards that are important, and those are things shared throughout the organization. So I think the next step for this very exciting research agenda is actually ask the janitors, not the CEO. Thank you.